Hi, I'm Haley with Neuhaus Education Center. In this video, we are going to discuss naming activities in an oral language and listening comprehension lesson. So as we talked about before in the overview video, for oral language, the goal is building rich language skills in your students. Oral language is listening and speaking, and when students have a really strong foundation in listening and speaking, it helps them build their reading comprehension and written expression skills. So when we're talking about naming, this is one of the activities you can do to help build oral language in your students. Naming is usually the first activity in each of our units in our Colors and Shapes of Language manual, which is the purple manual you'll be using for oral language. And we're asking that you can hopefully devote 5 to 8 minutes a day to build oral language in your students. One of the times you might do this is during your accurate and automatic reading lessons, the read aloud section, or you might be finding a different time of your instructional day to do these oral language lessons. Naming will hopefully just take one day out of your oral language and listening comprehension lesson plan, so just about 5 to 8 minutes that one day, and it's the first activity in the unit. And what's happening is the unit manual has a script for you as the teacher to go through with your kids to give them categories to name in. And it starts broad and then it goes more narrow. So let's look at one of the units in our manual. I'm on page 26 and I'm looking at the first activity here, 26, it's unit 9, transportation. And it says naming. So you can see we have A through I, and these are all different things that you're asking students to name. And I've underlined them. So we're naming ways to travel, travel on land, travel by air, travel by sea, signs you see when you travel, fast ways to travel, slow ways to travel, travel that has engines or motors, or ways to travel without an engine or motor. Now, sometimes you might have some answers listed, suggested answers, sometimes you won't. I like to brainstorm a few answers ahead of time just so I know where I'm taking my students, but basically you're letting them do the thinking. So when you say ways to travel on land, hopefully you have kids saying car, bus, walking, bicycle, so on and so forth. Every time you hear an appropriate answer, you're going to echo that answer so that everyone can hear that was an appropriate answer. If someone says an inappropriate answer, they say sailboat, just don't repeat it. We call this time during naming controlled pandemonium. You're going to have lots of students calling out at the same time, and that's okay. Not only are you validating the answers that you hear, but they're hearing other ideas from each other. We want them to be thinking, and speaking. All of it's coming out at one time. Now, sometimes students might get stumped. You might have the whole class looking at you and they just really don't know what you're asking, or they don't have the vocabulary or the world knowledge to be able to give answers to what you've asked them to talk about. So for example, if you have slow ways to travel, maybe they listed bicycle and then they're all staring at you. What should you do? Well, you can help scaffold their thinking and their answers. You could show them pictures, you could give them sentence stems, you could describe or use gestures, and all of these ways will help them think and be able to name some more. So when you're going through a naming day activity, you're going to go through all of those listed subjects or categories, have the students name them. You don't need to be writing anything at this time. You're just listening, having students really engage in that naming activity. If you want to track progress or just kind of see how your students are doing with naming, you can always give them a naming benchmark. The way you do this is give them 4 categories to name, and we have some suggested in our training materials. But you give them 4 categories to name, you have them name for 30 seconds each, and then you get the average for 1 minute. So you add up all 4 numbers, divide by 2 and get the average. And here's, based on our research here at Neuhaus, here's our naming benchmark. So you can keep that in mind when you're trying to think, are my students doing enough naming? Do they need more help with this? Are they struggling? Are they not struggling? And more information on that is in the materials when you took the oral language and listening comprehension training. So naming is a really fun activity for students. It also helps get the unit started off because it really activates their prior knowledge, and it helps you as the teacher realize what they know and what oral language and world knowledge you need to build in your students. If you have more questions about the naming activity in your oral language and listening comprehension lessons, you can refer to your training materials, like I said earlier, or you can always look in your Colors and Shapes manual.